Well, I don't even have to preach now after that. That says it all. 4 simple words. Thank you so much, friends, for that beautiful rendition. Because sometimes when we come to expressing love to others, words quickly fail, and we realize that. That's why Shakespeare invented poetry or something like that. At our kids growing up, we used to use hand signals for this to show just how much we loved each other. You may have done something like this. How much do we love you? We love you this much. But it's love, so you've got to one-up each other at that point. So then the next person says, I love you this much. Well, what is that? Well, it goes around the world and back to the other side, and that's more. So I love you more. And then the next person says, well, I love you this much. Well, what's that? Well, it goes to the extent of the ever-expanding universe and everything in the observable cosmos. So it's essentially infinite. I win, boom. I win love today. And I don't know if that's how it works at your house, if you're competitive in expressing love, but we are too. Sometimes expressing love, our words can fail. We try to communicate it and to put it into action. Maybe it's shaped like arms open wide. Maybe it's shaped like a Dr. Pepper can on a hot summer day. Maybe it's shaped like a bus, like this past week when Network of Community Ministries bus set up down the street at La Mirada, full of Arapaho folks and more out there to share food, and to share an invitation to ESL classes and immigration support and after-school care for kids and more, shaped like a community there to love their neighbor as themselves. Love takes many shapes, doesn't it? Last week, we began talking about Jesus' essential teaching that everything hangs on. Love God, love neighbor, as we love ourselves. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets, Jesus says, which that hang all the law and the prophets is shorthand in Jesus' culture for all of the scriptures and teachings of Jesus' religious tradition. All of it, the whole kit and caboodle. Love God, love neighbor, as we love ourselves. So in another account of this teaching, in a gospel that we call Luke, the crowd around had a follow-up question, just like our kids did today, which is really good because we totally have a follow-up question to love God, love neighbor as we love ourselves. So one of those is, okay, how do we love our neighbor? Like, what is love shaped like? What does it look like? How far out does it extend? Right? Isn't that the question? Especially in this day and age when it seems like the fabric of our common lives is stretched, or as the signs go up in our neighbors' yards in this season. All right. Sorry, I don't know if we're ready for that quite yet. We've heard this love your neighbor thing before, but how do we put it into action in our lives in our time? Well, those around Jesus had the very same questions. And so they asked, okay, Jesus, so who is my neighbor? Which meant, how far out am I supposed to extend this love? Is it this much or this much, right? And so to answer, Jesus tells this story, which is so Jesus. So Jesus tells this story, and for those who listened, who really listened, it had the power to change everything. And we may have heard this story before. It may be a new one for us. But if we listen afresh, it might change some things for us today, too. I'm going to listen closely. So it starts like this. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho on that Jericho road and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. Well, that's quite an opening scene in a Jesus story. It seems like Jesus is like telling an episode of Law and Order or something. You kind of expect like a bum bum at this point in the story. But Jesus begins this story purposefully to grab our attention, to depict someone in clear and deep, great need, so that we'll sit up and take notice, and so that we notice what happens next in the story. And it continues like this. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. A priest, right? who's a leader and a shepherd of the people, notices and just passes by. I'm sure he had some good, important, churchy things to do. Jesus doesn't pick this priest because he's a bad person. He picks him because he's a good person. And trust me, good people will always be able to find good reasons to walk on by. I have done it many times myself, right? I can come up with a lot of good reasons, lots of yeah, but, or counters and statistics, and that allow people to say, oh yeah, I can see that. That's a good point. And I'm sure you have some really important churchy, pastory stuff to take care of, and allow me to walk right by my neighbor, a child of God, in need. Whew. Jesus is coming in strong in this story and coming right for me this morning, apparently. But that's exactly what Jesus is doing. Jesus is telling this story in a way that cracks through our comfort, that pulls people past their comfortable, safe distance, extended version of love your neighbor, to stretch us a little bit farther toward the God of the infinite world, whose love and liberation and life is all-encompassing. This vision of our shared humanity and our mutuality, the shape of what it looks like to truly love our neighbor. A vision that has the power not just to perform love, but to transform and heal. But Jesus doesn't let up in this story. He continues. So likewise, a Levite. And a Levite was someone active in religion and in politics, in the civic life there. A Levite, when he came to the place and saw him pass by on the other side. I don't think it's accidental that the first two folks that Jesus identifies were involved in religion and politics, respectively. Because Jesus is saying, don't get caught up in the higher calling and miss the essential calling to love God and love neighbor that sits at the heart of everything. God cares more about us getting it right with our neighbor than passing right by and getting to church on time. In fact, we cannot love God if we don't love our neighbor. And for our civic and political responsibility, it is nothing if it doesn't care for the vulnerable among us. So elsewhere, Jesus goes even deeper straight to the heart. In Matthew chapter 23, he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith." He says, your church may look good and it may smell like heaven, apparently. But you've passed by on the other side from justice and mercy and actually living out your faith. To walk in faith means to walk on the side of the road that sometimes isn't so pretty and doesn't smell like all of those fresh spices. Because that's the side where mercy and justice can meet the vulnerable. And so Jesus says the first way to love our neighbors is to notice the need and to stop and listen. And right now in our world, there are those in our friend circle, those in our church, those in our community around us, prophets in our world and in the streets who are calling us to notice the needs around us. But it can easily get drowned out by everything or just become one of the many voices on a very busy street. So what does love look like? It looks like the effort to stop and resist the inertia that moves us quickly past, to give our attention and to not look away, to not just go back to the endless scroll that sweeps us on down the Jericho road, but instead to listen to our neighbors who are asking for us to notice them in their need, to notice inequity and systemic racism, bigotry in our world, the profound vulnerability of our immigrant neighbors, or those who are needing reproductive care, those who are seeking a safe space to be themselves, those who are lonely in our world or experiencing economic struggle, and on and on. whatever need you meet on the road of life, to notice and not just pass by, to listen. Will we take that first step to extend and to love our neighbor, to extend a little farther? So Jesus says next, when you notice a need, work to break through the barriers that keep you from responding. And to show us this, Jesus chose the person who at the time was locked behind the most barriers of all. Jesus says a Samaritan was traveling and came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. Now, that may not mean so much to us today because we call this story the Good Samaritan story, but if you were in the audience in Jesus' time and you heard Jesus begin to talk about this Good Samaritan, you would have needed a fainting couch or something, right? Or other folks have been, oh, no, Jesus, not in this part of the world, right? Because Samaritans were the most other of others in their culture, and they were the Jews' literal neighbors. So get this, a long time ago, Israel had split between the north and the south, and those divisions lingered. The north, where Samaria was, had gradually taken on some different culture and religious practice than the Jews, and the Jews saw this as less than and corrupted. And like people in our time, sometimes people try to build the biggest walls between those that we share the most with. The feeling of Jews toward Samaritans was centuries of racism and bigotry and nationalism that had been passed down through culture and through religion, these monumental barriers that kept the Jews and the Samaritans from regarding each other as neighbors worthy of stopping and noticing. And so Jesus says the Samaritan broke through the barriers to help his Jewish neighbor and fellow traveler. And at this moment, people were stunned. Because what Jesus was doing was telling the story and locating it right in the middle of their real life and their biggest struggles to love and to extend. He was combating, among other things, this powerful intersection that happens when religion and nationalism and racism gets in the way of our ability to love our neighbor and recognize the inextricable mutuality in which we were all made. That intersection keeps us from crossing barriers. Instead, it creates them. It doesn't bring love, it plays on fear. It doesn't only stay on its side of the street, but builds a wall between us. So tonight, our Arapaho youth are gathering around a conversation about Christian nationalism, which is one name in our time, in our country, for that intersection of nationalism with religious and racial supremacy. What Pastor Kathy's teacher, Jim Wallace, calls in his new book on this topic, the false white gospel, because it's the farthest thing from the true teaching of Jesus, the brown-skinned Afro-Semitic son of a day laborer and a young mom who put love at the center of everything and centered the Samaritan in this story of what love is shaped like. The great pastor Carlos Rodriguez recently posted this tweet that just clarified the different gospels, the common things that we might hear on the streets, and what Jesus taught. And so you heard that right. Yes, sometimes I find wisdom on Twitter. And I did in this particular case, and I want to share it with you because it encapsulates this. This is what he wrote. He said, Christian nationalism says fight. Christ says, blessed are the peacemakers. Christian nationalism says, America first. Christ says, for God so loved the world. Christian nationalism says mass deportation. Christ says, welcome the stranger. Christian nationalism says U.S. Christ says us. That's why Jesus used the Samaritan in this story, for the people then and for us too. Because it shows us the shape of God's love, not a line in the sand, but an infinite circle that stretches to the extent of the ever-expanding cosmos and embraces all the people in it, including our beautiful country and all of the beautiful countries in our world and the people within them. The Samaritan noticed the need of a fellow child of God and did not let human barriers get in the way of extending love, because he knew that borders and barriers are man's doing, not God's. Nothing that divides us is divine. God so loved the whole world, and that includes all of us. And more than ever now, our world needs us, and places like Arapahoe to choose love as the center above all. Our nation needs it. Our neighborhoods need it. Our own souls need us to lift high and to love wide and to proclaim aloud the way of Christ in a world that is seeking it. No matter how fast the traffic is sweeping us along on our side of the road, to let love stop us and lead us across the street to our neighbor and to find the heart of God that is already there before us. So how do we do that? How do we walk through the barriers toward love? Well, I'll tell you, using Legos. You are learning very quickly in 3 weeks just how deeply we love Legos at my house. So a while back, my son Hudson went on a kick building scripture stories out of Lego bricks. Yeah, he just did this one day. It was kind of amazing. He made this little mini scene of the Good Samaritan. When I asked him about this story, he said, yeah, it's the story of when everyone else walked by, but the Samaritan got down off his horse and helped the person. And I stopped, because I'd never noticed that detail, that the Samaritan got down off his horse and helped. Friends, what does love look like? What is the shape of love? What is the antidote to all of the other ways of being? To get down our horse and help. For me, whatever high horse I sit upon, whatever elevation of power or privilege or patriarchy, whatever nationality or name elevates me, to stop and listen and get down off my horse so that I can help. But the Samaritan didn't just get down off his horse. It says the Samaritan lifted his neighbor onto the horse where he once sat. The Samaritan went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he brought him and put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him, to get down off his own horse so that he could put someone else on it. Do I do that as a mentor, as a leader, as a neighbor, as a parent or a partner, as a white male pastor-ish type person? That's my elevation. Whatever your elevation is, do you use it to elevate others? We have a group here called Journey Toward Racial Justice, which is doing an amazing job helping lead us in our congregation on that journey. And one of the books on the reading list for that community is this book by Layla Saad, a workbook called Me and White Supremacy. In it, Layla describes being an ally, being someone willing to get down off our horse and help. And she says that being an ally looks like this, taking on the struggle as our own. It means getting down off our horse to meet someone in their struggle. Standing up even when you feel scared. Being willing to stop and notice and cross the street. Transferring the benefits of your privilege to those who lack it. Lifting others up with our own elevation. And acknowledging that while you too feel pain, the conversation is not about you, but the healing of our neighbor, and doing whatever it takes to help heal. That's what God's vision of loving our neighbor in need looks like. 3 walked by, but only one noticed the need, broke through the barriers. Only one was willing to get off the horse and lift another up and to take on the price of the neighbor's healing. And though it was just one, it made all the difference. And this example, over thousands of years, has transformed our lives and made our world a more compassionate and just place. It says the Samaritan took 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, said, "Take care of him. When I come back, I will repay you." Get this, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. How far does love extend? As far as it needs to. That's the shape of love. In this moment, I imagine Jesus' audience was silent, contemplating their own lives, remembering all those they had walked by, and trying to open their minds to this radical, revolutionary love of whatever it takes. And then Jesus said these simple but profound words: "Go and do likewise." Go and do likewise. Notice the need. Get down off our horse, lift the other up, and go do whatever it takes. As far as love calls us, extend love. Go and do likewise. That, friends, is the shape of love. That is what will take love your neighbor off the page and into our day and age, our lives, our homes, our streets, our schools, our workplaces, going and doing likewise. I saw it here at this church this week. I mentioned the journey to La Mirada, this group of people from Arapahoe who got down off their horse, or in this case, got down off the bus and went into Love the Neighbors at La Mirada, an affordable housing apartment complex just a little bit down the street from our church. A place that our church is working to help support holistically. Amidst all the rhetoric that might divide us, or policies that are hanging over our neighbors like swords of Damocles, amidst language differences and cultural distances, they extended love, and our neighbors extended it right back. Love in action. Through sharing food, through invitation to after-school care, tutoring for kids, by listening to the needs of our neighbors and trying to respond with ESL classes and connection to JFON, Justice for Our Neighbors, our conference's Immigration Assistance Initiative. And by sharing fresh slices of watermelon and smiles, which truly is the language of love, I say. And it was beautiful to see. It was just the beginning of a relationship that's going to extend toward, we hope, whatever it takes. And it was a loud proclamation of a different way. A way with love at its center. A way that is calling to us always, and especially now, go and do likewise. Like the Samaritan, and like Jesus. Because, friends, the one we follow is the one who stepped down in love to lift all people up. The one who took love at the center and stretched out and extended love, whatever the price, to embrace us all. Love is this much, Jesus said. But remember, I am with you always, even as far as love takes you. Now go and do likewise. Arapahoe, may it be so with us, now and forever, but especially right now. May we go and do likewise. Amen.